Was that just Superman music that's playing right there? Hey everyone, welcome to, what is the name of the show again?
Nerdgasm.
That's right, welcome to Nerdgasm. Starring Dave Canfield, not that other guy who was right up front there.
We miss Jerry Hara.
Tonight, let's make our introductions. I am Superman, and to my left is...
I am the Knight. I am Batman.
Christian Bale, to my left. And to my right, for the very first time, we have a very special guest who is an authority on all things Superman, as you can see from his display right there.
Well, today I'm going to be Superboy because the mantle of Superman was taken, but only today. You know, Wednesdays I'm usually Captain America, but today I'm Superboy.
Usually Superboy doesn't have more facial hair than Superman. So we're going to be covering all the different films. Now that Man of Steel came out yesterday to Blu-ray and DVD, we're going to be covering all things related to Superman, pretty much that we could think of. So, but before we even get into the movies, we have an opportunity to really talk about the history from its origin, Action Comics #1, right? Is that right? I'm always going to defer to you, by the way, because you're the expert here.
the uber super nerd.
Nerds usually don't have this many tattoos. Oh my gosh! Ladies and gentlemen, if you can see on his arm, he's got a tattoo of Superman right on his arm.
This is actually a trick sleeve. I'm a tattooist myself, and this is actually Superman flying with Metropolis. And then when you flip my arm, it's Batman dropping with Gotham Cathedral. So,
and we got them both at the same table here. Batman says this is his forearm. This is his the front side of his arm right here. So how exactly, we bought a lot of items in today. Like, it's funny, I said bring some stuff. All I had from my show and tell was Action Comics, like a comic that my brother had from the 70s, Action Comics number, I'm going to see a number on this thing where Superman goes mad. And I had a Lex Luthor comic book. As a fan of the Superman movies, I don't know how I didn't have more than this. But this guy comes, I don't know, I think that's probably about like $1,000 of Superman stuff at least that we got.
This is actually just a little bit of a collection that I thought were like cool points within the Superman story that I myself enjoyed as a Superman fan, and things that made an impact in the Superman history, and what kind of impact it made on like popular culture. A lot of people don't realize that Superman, when he was first invented, was actually not invented to be a superhero at all. He was invented to be a super villain. He actually had mental powers, and he had a bald head, and he appeared in a comic called Science Fiction, where it was called Reign of the Superman,
But yet that guy became Lex Luthor, the original
he arguably could have been the template, absolutely.
Right, so now... can we throw the image up of Action Comics #1 on the screen? We don't have our same technical director today. He's out windsurfing down the Gulf of Mexico. We have our new crew in today. So if we could throw up that original image, it started with Action Comics. Now, is Action Comics specifically only Superman for its first number of issues, or did it vacillate between different characters?
No, Action Comics #1 was pure Superman. It was 64 pages of just full color Superman, and when it was for sale, everybody was buying it. Everybody was eating it up because it was the first time that they saw something like Superman, where he didn't really fight villains. He fought, social injustice. He fought, people who were, slumlords. He fought people that were cutting people's pay. He was more of a hero for the common person.
He was inspired somewhat by, say, an FDR, what people looked up to as FDR. You're describing a sort of like the idealized version of what people saw in FDR.
Yeah,
same time period.
Exactly. What they saw in him during that time, where the average person was probably only making $25 a week. He symbolized to the people, in a nation that was struggling, that anyone could do something good for anyone, being completely selflessness. And it was pretty cool to see.
Do you have anything to offer on that, Batman?
No, I had not yet appeared.
That's right. When did Batman appear in relation? How much longer after Batman's appearance did
Well,
After Superman's appearance. They did that.
not that long after, it turns out that a lot of people don't realize that Superman was the first comic book superhero. There was no other comic book superhero before Superman. There was cowboy comics, there was space stuff, there was mystery stuff, but he was the first one. Coincidentally enough, only maybe 2 or 3 years later, the second one was Batman.
So now, of all of the comics that were from this time period, we're talking, what, 1939?
Yeah, in or around between 1939 and 1940.
Did anything else last from this era? Or is it pretty much just DC Comics? You told me Detective Comics. I didn't realize that Detective Comics, did you know that part? DC stood for Detective Comics?
Yes.
I'm out of the loop here. So, did any other comic labels from that time period have characters that survived to this day?
You know what? If there is none, I wouldn't know any of them. But it was mostly in due because of the Comics Code. The Comics Code was not established during that time, so people were running not necessarily rampant, but there was no restrictions on what they could put into comics. During that time, there was a lot of comic books that had what they, at the time in the 1930s, would consider pornography. They had a lot of girls wearing very small pieces of, clothing and full cover.
Nothing like today. Comic books today are very chaste,
Yes,
right?
yes. So Superman, especially, and Batman, afterwards, were able to survive the Comics Code because of what they initially stood for, which was ultimately good triumphing over evil.
Right. Well, on that, we're going to continue to talk a lot about our feelings on Superman, but if we can run the trailer for Superman, the 1978 film with Christopher Reeve, that'd be terrific, because this is really the first introduction that so many of us had to the character, other than, a comic book.
Yeah, well, myself included.
Yeah, because the first thing that I really saw, the first thing that made me a fan of it was the original. Although surprisingly, I just learned. Here we go.
That was the whole trailer.
My friends, I'm not given to wild, unsupported statements. And I tell you that we must evacuate this planet immediately.
Jor-El, be reasonable.
Once there was a civilization, much like ours, but with a greater intelligence, greater powers, and a greater capacity for good. Tragic moment, that world was destroyed. But there was one survivor.
Now, wouldn't that beat all get out?
Because of the wisdom and compassion of Jor-El, because he knew the human race had the capacity for goodness, he sent us his only son. His name is Kal-El. He will call himself Clark Kent. But the world will know him as Superman. This year, Superman brings you the gift of flight. Superman, the movie.
And there we have it, the film that's become the template to so many comic book movies that still are made today. I think every time a filmmaker takes on a comic movie, they harken it back to Richard Donner's Superman movie. They said, like Christopher Nolan, when he took on Batman Begins, says, I want to make this like Superman. I think when Bryan Singer took on X-Men, he wanted to liken it to Superman. I mean, I think it's somehow the pieces came together in a way, probably it's as good of, in my opinion, as good of an example of a superhero movie that I've seen. It manages to walk the right, and it manages to be just the exact tone in terms of it's silly, it's funny, but yet human enough and real enough to get pulled into the story. Unlike something like Superman 3, where it sort of becomes like a cartoon or a Batman and Robin.
Yeah,
where
it's
it
a big
becomes,
reason
where
for
it
that.
becomes, where it becomes just sort of a walking cartoon, and you kind of lose your relatability to it. And I think that it's an exceptionally well-written film for the kind of film it is.
Well, it was Mario Puzo.
Right, but also what Puzo wrote was extraordinarily truncated. I read that William Goldman was the first choice of writer, and they said he's not big enough of a name. And now this is the late '70s. Puzo's coming off the success of The Godfather, and they hired him really on the basis of his on the success of that franchise, or the success of the book and the movies.
Right.
And therefore, he's qualified. It's a stupid Hollywood thing. And this particularly, like if you're successful for one thing, let's hire you for something completely different because we could sell something, because we could sell
Well, I
the
mean,
name.
they've been doing that since they started, and they still do it today. So you can't really be surprised. I mean, name recognition sells a lot. I mean, that's why you pay a fortune to put Marlon Brando in a movie for all of 10 minutes.
So when I speak of name recognition, my mother to this day still confuses Christopher Reeve, George Reeve, and Steve Reeves. What's that film? I love that Steve Reeves Superman. No, that's Christopher Reeve. Would you George Reeves? No, that was the original Superman. Steve Reeves
Well,
was
actually, we learned that
Hercules.
he wasn't the original.
Okay, he was the second. Okay,
Yeah,
semantics.
that is
Semantics. Just true. He's the one that was really
Well, he was
No.
the first TV show.
right. No, even though he looked like he was in his mid-50s when he took on the role of Superman and was wearing his super trunks up to here. So I think that this is it's sort of like the perfect comic book movie, I think. And when I was very young, I used to like Superman 2 more than I liked Superman 1. But by the time I was like 10, 11, it's just like there was a wit and there's something so well done about the first one. Although I have some issues with the Marlon Brando. Part of it, I think it's a little bit drawn. I think it's a little bit drawn out, and
It is, and I think some of the edits of it nowadays are like director extended edits. Even the ones you see on TV have extra scenes in them.
that's part of possibly what poisoned me. It's like I would see
Yeah.
the television versions where they're trying to milk every moment of every Marlon
Yeah.
Brando sigh and line. What was your
Yeah.
opinion of the of Superman's from '78?
Well, you also got to keep in mind where social media was during the time when Superman 1 came out. Marlon
Nowhere.
Brando was the end thing.
Right.
So him being Jor-El, even for, whether it was 5 minutes or whether it was 7 scenes, really didn't bother me too much because he did such a fantastic job.
I thought he did just fine. It's just it's more an issue with the way those scenes were staged. It was, and the way that Krypton looked. It looked like
Yeah, I mean
it's one of the weirdest looking Hollywood sets ever.
well, it's a winter wonderland.
But also, again, up until then, Krypton wasn't really established visually within the comic books. They guessed it. The only thing that they really had to go with was that Krypton was a much more advanced civilization than us, and then they just went with whatever it is that they had.
Does that, I don't know, that visual to you, does that spell greater sophistication, or does that spell that these guys are really freaking eccentric? It's like they live in
Well, geniuses are often eccentric, so I guess if you're
Yeah,
trying to
so-
build that sort of super civilization and stuff, the idea that they would take sort of a weird cross between this future idealistic society.
But how are those
and
buildings even
the ancient
practical?
Greeks.
It just like it doesn't seem like there's any appliances. Everything is so like architecturally, these guys are idiots. From Krypton.
I think it was
not
mostly
user-friendly.
they need to sell the wow of
Right.
Krypton.
They're
Not
definitely trying to make.
necessarily
By the way, when he's saying "wow," I'm seeing his tattoo of the Green Lantern, Lantern ring on
Yeah.
his on his middle finger. This man is as cool and geek simultaneously as they come.
It's so
Yeah.
sad. But yeah, that's really what they were aiming for. I mean, when they were filming all three of these sets, and when I say three, I mean Metropolis, Kansas, and Krypton. They were not in the same place. For example, one place was in London, the other place was, it escapes me, maybe like Canada or something like that. So it was an extremely expensive movie, and the writing actually didn't even have one writer. It had maybe 3 or 4 writers. And then they reread the entire script and said, you know, we need to kind of cut this up and put some humor into it. So then they got another writer who mostly did comedy. And henceforth, that's why we have so many quirky scenes in the movie.
Right. And I think that writer went on to write 3. Right. So it's basically, hey, we don't need those other guys who made the story really good. We just need the guy who did all the pranks. You know?
Yeah, it's basically a joke writer who was hired to do 3, which I'm sure we'll get to when it comes up.
Oh, wow.
Right. I just rewatched 3 today, and the last time I saw it, I was probably like 12.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was interesting.
There's
to
a
revisit
reason that
one.
you took so long in between watching that movie. And I am a huge Richard Pryor fan and do not fault him for taking a great
but,
paycheck.
You know, we see that today. We're huge fans of certain actors and actresses, and then they show up in these movies where it's completely out of their realm, and we're like, why did you do that? And,
Like when Daniel Day-Lewis does Scary Movie 8.
Yeah, Richard.
I mean, we're going to be shocked.
Yeah, well, Richard Pryor, when I was growing up, was a dirty comedian who cursed a lot and really, you know, made me laugh in a very, you know, like, oh, don't tell mom I'm watching this way. And he's on a Superman movie? You know, so it was really
had
weird for me.
Batman and Robin been successful financially, the idea was to bring Howard Stern in as the Scarecrow for the following one.
Yeah, I heard that rumor also.
And thank God that didn't happen.
Thank God.
No, so, but what is everybody's just opinion, like on a scale of 1 to 10? You know, what is your feeling on this film? And where do you place it in light of all of the different films?
In all the different, I mean, this is, the first one is my favorite of all the Superman films that have been made. I give it a 9 out of 10, and everyone knows I'm a tough grader, so that's a really good grade on that one. I love Superman 2. Superman 2 has a great rewatchable quality.
In time. We'll get
But
to it.
Superman 1 is sort of this epic movie. I mean, it's just a staple of 70s movie making all the way through. And as a Superman fan, it's and I give it a 9 for one particular reason: the ending. Not to spoil it for everyone, fixing the world's problems by flying backwards around the planet and reversing time.
I do that
Even
all
as
the
a
time.
kid, that was even as a kid, that was, I couldn't really get into that. I mean, it's pretty cheesy, pretty terrible. But you know, aside from that, the rest of the movie, I mean, from the beginning, from Krypton, everything else like that, it's a very long movie. It's a commitment to watch, but all the way up to even, you know, especially the action scenes where he's saving the people after the missile hits. I'm totally into it until he starts flying away.
And what do you rate? Scale of 1 to 10.
Well, Superman 1 and Superman 2 were filmed together. Not even back to back, but at the same time. So Superman 1 and 2 are essentially just a continuation of each other. Part 1, I would have to say, geared more towards the original Superman from the 1930s, where you had Clark Kent, you had Lois Lane, and it was beautifully done, and it was perfect, and I absolutely loved it. I would probably have to give it an 8, honestly, but that whole spinning around the world thing was like, what, are you serious? But it was just an awesome movie, and Christopher Reeve actually, and his relationship with, her name eludes me, the one who played as Lois Lane.
Margaret Kidder.
Yes, Margaret Kidder. Their relationship together made the movie for me. Christopher Reeve's chemistry made the movie.
You know, I would give the film a 10 out of 10. I think it's a perfect comic book movie, and I think it's my favorite incarnation of Superman, and I liked a lot of them. You know, and Margot Kidder was this really unique-looking actress. She's quirky. She's probably not what people would imagine a Lois Lane would be like. You'd go for a kind of generic, cute actress, and they went for somebody that with a lot of edge. you know, and who was really unique. And I like that casting choice. I think
She actually hit Lois Lane pretty spot on from the actual TV shows, whereas in Lois Lane didn't really take any lip from anyone. It wasn't until she
It was
was
definitely also a callback to romantic comedies of the 30s with Cary Grant.
Yeah.
And,
You know,
And that was one of the major things they were shooting
Yeah,
for. I
she
mean,
was a very
the
hard,
romance
you know,
quality of it.
character. She was a news reporter. She was, you know, down and dirty. You know, got to get the story. But it was only when she was around Superman where she became like this little, googly-eyed, high school girl.
by the way, it is now time that we go into our Nerd News Girl segment. And on Skype is Missy Heather. The fantastic Missy Heather is joining us tonight as our Nerd News Girl, and she's going to be telling us some pretty interesting factoids about the original Superman movie.
Hi guys.
Hey, Missy.
Welcome back.
Yeah,
Thank
so,
you.
No, this time, the last time we tried to have you as a Nerd News Girl, it failed horribly because you were like, it didn't work. We had to phone it in. Now you're here with us.
I'm here, but I'm breaking the rules because I'm not wearing Superman. I'm wearing Captain America.
Okay.
So,
All right. So
you
you
already
be
had
that way.
so it's
A
okay.
little defiant.
You ready for some trivia?
Okay, Miss America. So I would love to hear, these top, 4 or 5? You got 4 bits of
4.
trivia for us?
Yes, I do.
Do we get to guess?
Okay.
It's multiple choice.
Actually,
Lay it out.
the third one, Peppercorn, is for you, but you have to wait. The first one, several actors were considered for the part of Superman, including Warren Beatty, Paul Newman, James Caan, Clint Eastwood, Burt Reynolds, Nick Nolte, Robert Redford, Arnold Schwarzenegger, thank God they didn't choose him, Jeff Bridges, Jon Voight, and at one point, even Sylvester Stallone lobbied for this role.
You know, there was a little more about that Sylvester Stallone choice that I found interesting. Stallone lobbied for it. This is right after Rocky was out.
Right.
And I mean, the thing is, James Caan, Sylvester Stallone, from my opinion, it's too street. You know, like these guys sound like they come from New York. They really do.
Right.
No matter how much they try to mask it, it's almost like casting Robert De Niro as Superman. It's not going to really
That
be a
would have
match
been
made in
interesting,
heaven.
though.
It's not going to be a match made
When
in
they
heaven.
had that actually on the table, it was very short-lived.
But I'll tell you, just to finish that thought, Marlon Brando had final say in the casting. And so Brando had final say in the casting, and he says, I'm not, if I do this film, I don't believe in Sylvester Stallone, Superman, So it never.
That was a good impression.
It was.
It's a fly,
I was convinced.
And so that's part of why it didn't come to pass. I mean, because he was successful enough where he could have kept lobbying it. Well, do you really want this guy to be Superman? You got a problem with Lois, you got a problem with me. It's not really what I would be looking for in Superman. And how about our next news item? The
Okay.
trivia, Missy.
Marlon Brando refused to memorize most of his lines in advance. In the scene where he puts infant Kal-El into the escape pod, he's actually reading the lines from the diaper of the baby. That's he didn't have that many scenes. How could he not memorize
He
the
didn't
lines?
memorize anything when he was famous. He was famous. He's just like he would
Have
write
to.
lines on the forehead
was-
of his actors.
Yeah, no, he was actually like that since the beginning. There's a story of Marlon Brando that Elia Kazan, who directed, of course, Streetcar. This is when actually he was directing the stage play of Streetcar, where he actually Marlon Brando insisted on being paid for the show ahead of time, and Elia Kazan actually lied about when rehearsal started. He said they started 2 weeks earlier than they actually did because he knew once he gave Marlon Brando the money, he was just going to hit the town and blow it all, and then he would eventually roll back in when he ran out of money to do the actual show. He was famous for being a huge pain in the buttocks when towards directors and stuff like that. But unfortunately, it's all up there on the screen when you see it.
God,
or
I
on the
love
stage
that
in
man.
that case.
But there's a story about him writing lines all over sets of.
Yeah, he was
So
famous
like
for
he'd
that.
be doing a scene and he'd open up a drawer and say, "Do you know what I thought earlier today?" And then at one point he had the line written on the forehead of an actor. So whenever he had to talk to, I think it was Paul Winfield, to be like, "By the way, I have to tell you something very deep from my heart. And they'd probably get real close because he's reading the lines off the forehead of his actor. Because he's Brando,
That is awesome.
you got away with it. I can't do
Yeah,
that.
No, you gotta give it to him.
I
He's
can do
awesome.
So how about our next news story, which is, you said this is the one for Peppercorn?
I'm very
This
excited.
is the one for Peppercorn because I heard him discuss the ending of the movie that he didn't like. So this one's for you. The film was originally meant to end with a cliffhanger. The nuclear missile that Superman deflects would float off into space where it would explode, releasing the 3 villains we see at the start. Ultimately, director Richard Donner decided that such an ending was too gimmicky. So, Peppercorn, which version would you like? The one that Donner dismissed or the one that's there?
That's a tough choice. I mean, it basically would have changed the beginning of Superman 2, but it really, when you think about it, the end result was exactly the same. Would it, in that ending, though, would it still have him whipping around the planet, turning back time?
I don't think so.
Okay. Then I would have much rather had him throw the missile into space and then the cliffhanger. Listen, it's just a comic book movie. Every comic book movie is sort of a cliffhanger.
Yeah, I mean,
You know they're coming back.
it would seem now that, little piece of trivia, thank you for that, by the way, because I actually didn't even know that, would make perfect sense considering that that power that Superman has never been shown in any comic book. So it does seem that that's pure Hollywood that wasn't taken from the comic books. Let's just throw it in there. Yeah.
Okay, so now on to, is this the last
Last one.
nerd news bit of trivia, right?
Yes.
Bring it on.
Okay. Jack Nicholson and Gene Wilder were both considered for the role of Lex Luthor. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Jack Nicholson was actually reconsidered. Can we throw that picture up of Nicolas Cage as Superman? Because
I remember, yeah, when it was
that makes
Tim Burton supposedly.
2
directed it.
times that Jack Nicholson was considered for the role of Lex Luthor, because when Tim Burton was going to do the version in the 90s, which would have been the biggest colossal failure of Warner Brothers history, they offered the role to Nicholson again. But by the way, do you know that Tim Burton got paid for that anyway, because it was a pay-or-play deal?
Oh,
I love Hollywood.
Yeah. Okay,
It's
what
such
do you guys think of Nicolas Cage as
Nicolas
Superman?
Cage probably got $6,000 just to put that on.
Yeah,
have to
so it's pretty amazing. Like, it was never a good idea to use Burton or Cage. I believe the way the story goes, in that failed incarnation of Superman lives.
That was what it was going to be called, yeah.
It was that Nicolas Cage said, they're going to like to play Lex Luthor. And then John Peters, the brilliant film producer, said, no, I think you'd be a great Superman. Because John Peters is an idiot.
Well, Nicolas Cage himself is a huge comic
Yeah.
book nut.
In
fact, actually, his last name is not his real name.
Coppola would be his real name.
Yeah, it's real nice.
And Missy, you're still on the line. Not to, okay, we're gonna be waiting. Okay, I'm realizing we have a review okay, so yeah, he's a Coppola. But and he changed. Were you gonna say that he changed his name to match Johnny Cage from Mortal Kombat?
No, he actually changed his name to Cage from one of his favorite Marvel comic book superheroes, Luke Cage.
Right.
No idea.
Yeah.
Is that Iron Fist? I mean, Power
He
Man and Iron
was
Fist?
within that little realm of
Yeah,
like
young.
Iron Fist and Luke
Supposedly
Cage.
they're doing a Luke Cage series for,
Now, Miss
not that this is important, but for Netflix.
I heard something like that.
Yeah.
Missy Heather. Now we must continue on with, because I asked you recently if you had watched, if you had played any Superman games, and being that this is Nerdgasm, we try to cover all corners of being a nerd, including video games. And you told me that you played Superman Returns for the Xbox 360.
I did.
Okay.
I did.
I always wondered about that game. I remember seeing the previews and all of that, and I thought it looked cool. But what can you tell us about that gaming experience?
What I would call it is it's a rent, not a buy. And I'll tell you why. The graphics were cool. The designer spent a lot of time in the Metropolis. When you flew by as Superman, you could actually see the reflections on the windows. The buildings were awesome. Everything was great. The bad guys were well drawn. Huge problems. Number one, finish the game 5-6 hours tops. To me, that's not worth the money. I'm sorry. Also,
That's like $10 an hour. You buy $60 games, $10 an hour.
It just, having the combat is great for me. I like fighting things, but the controls were not so great. So when you're flying around and you're doing the wind moves and you can blow off like 100 cars out of the way in the roads, that's great. But when you're trying to do the complicated buttons, half circle, double, back A, you would wind up flying yourself into the air or running instead of actually finishing off your move. So I didn't like the controls in that aspect. If I want to fight, I want to be able to just get it off and just kill people. I don't want to, be in the middle of some power move and then fly myself into the air. So for me, it's a rent. I did not play the new
I'm
one.
not sure where you'd rent it these days. Although, wait, I guess, does Netflix do or GameFly?
Yeah.
GameFly still has the older games?
It's GameFly.
GameFly.
Can
Yeah,
I get like old Atari games off from GameFly?
I mean, I remember playing the video game myself and me being a huge Superman fan and not enjoying it really. I think the only thing that I really enjoyed was the fact that you could destroy a whole bunch of stuff. But other than that, the game was not that great.
Have there been any work, and I don't, with the exception of, what is it, Injustice, which we actually reviewed last week, where you could play as Superman in sort of a fighting style game. There hasn't really been a good Superman game.
Lego Batman 2, where you can play
There
as
is a new
Superman.
one.
Well, it's a Lego
There is a
game.
new one, Man of Steel, but I have not played it, so I didn't even see the movie Man of Steel. So
You're missing out.
Okay,
Don't
yeah,
watch
we're
the
gonna get-
review. We'll
it
blow
had
the
mixed
ending.
reviews.
Yes,
I mean,
we're gonna be talking
Huge spoiler
probably
alerts.
probably in depth. You would never know that Superman was really a woman. All of these crazy things.
Oh, come on. I take offense because there was a really good woman villain in Superman 2, and that's actually my favorite Superman movie, which, Dave, you asked me which one I liked.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
you know what? Hold on to that.
Because we're gonna talk about
in
Superman
the
2.
new Superman, if that's what you liked about Part 2, you're not going to be disappointed in this new one.
There's another
I
Ursa.
disagree, but that's
There is
not
another Ursa. There's another character that sort of fits that description. Whether you like that character or not is a whole different story. So Missy, you are wonderful, and we have to have you on again soon. We're now going to go into the next segment.
Okay.
So once it comes time for Man of Steel, you got to tune out because we don't want to spoil it too much for you.
Yes.
Okay.
We tell our viewers not to watch.
You watch. We'll try to be subtle with
Please
that.
do not watch this program.
Spoiler alert. There you go.
Okay, so it's time for the guessing game. So if we could throw up the every week, I attempt to stump the audience. Okay, now this is the time for the audience to get interactive with us. I want to throw an image up on the screen of somebody. Control room, do we have that image up? Do we have that image up? Okay, yeah, thumbs up. Okay, and so people in the chat room, could you tell me who you believe the person in this photograph is? And like until you, and I'll start to give you hints.
Charlton Heston.
Okay, now I'll give you a hint. It does pertain somehow to the Superman movies. Can you
Pretty
think?
easy one. Come on, people.
Okay. Peppercorn's got a leg up. He's got a leg up because he directed a play that spoofs this movie.
Is there a buzzer that we can hit?
Okay, so Cutie-Kins says, looks familiar, but you can't place it. Let me give you a hint. Australia. That's a very loose hint. That's a very vague hint, right? Okay, so everybody keep
all
up.
your wide spectrum of impersonations tonight. It's nice.
So I'm going to do you next.
Oh, good
That's
luck
not
with
odd.
that one.
So, okay, let's have the reveal of who that is. That was from Young Frankenstein, and the actor was a bearded Gene Hackman. So he was playing the blind man from Young Frankenstein in that 73 film before he ever played Lex Luthor. So he's actually playing a much older man.
Correct.
He's pretty much playing the age he is now in that. So I thought I'd stump you with that. Peppercorn got it.
I immediately knew it.
You knew it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I got the audience. Okay, so it's time.
Everyone go out and watch Young Frankenstein.
It is time,
After the show.
It is time that we go into our Superman 2 trailer. We're going to be talking through it pretty much. They're going to play it in the background, and we can have a live Mystery Science Theater style commentary on top of this while it plays.
In my opinion, this is the most the rewatch value, I could watch this one over and over again. Anytime it's on.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and my friends and I used to quote it all the time. We used to do the Superman 2 rap, which I will not demonstrate, where we would just do, and we used to use Ursula's lines a lot for that one.
Oh, Superman.
The way she's hit Superman, the best.
It
Hands down.
was. It was.
Now, did you
She
guys
was
see
epic.
the director's cut of Superman 2?
I did.
I did.
Or the Richard Donner.
The Richard Donner cut.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, which do you prefer?
I would have to say that the Richard Donner cut was not as good as the other one.
I'm going
No,
to
I
agree.
liked the Richard Linklater one.
The Richard Linklater one?
Isn't that
Well, the Richard Donner one had the
Richard
extra scenes.
Donner
It had.
was Richard? Yeah, but
Richard Linklater is the director of Slacker.
Oh, no, who am I thinking? Who's the director who took over for Donner on 2?
Richard Lester.
Yes.
Linklater.
I'd have to say Richard Lester's version.
Right.
I
Richard
enjoyed
Lester.
better. And not because that
Okay, but
particular
let's-
one has a place in my heart, but just because
Right.
They
Richard
shot
Donner
it
one just
in-
seemed too much
It
with
wasn't
And it's
Superman
done.
and Lois Lane together.
It wasn't.
Too
It
much.
wasn't
And
done.
it has the same ending.
Right.
That's the
So,
first one.
so the film is Superman 2. The cut that we see is not a fair depiction of the film that Richard Donner would have done because he got
Right.
fired. He had shot 75% of principal photography on
They
Superman.
cut the
2.
budget way back in it too.
Yeah, well, the
So-
budget was skyrocketing.
Now,
Yeah.
so much of what we see in Superman 2 is thanks to Donner because he directed a lot of these scenes.
Right.
And then when you later see the directing style that Lester had for Superman 3, you know what scenes he did, like the scenes at Niagara Falls
Yeah.
with
Oh,
the quirky bellboy and stuff like that.
I think even the
And-
scene where he took off his symbol and threw it at him all weird. I was just like, what the
Yeah,
hell?
I mean, Lester.
They added a couple new Superman power, and there's the other one where they shoot a white beam out of their hands.
Yeah, they.
I was like, do you remember any Kryptonian in the comic books ever having that ability?
That's a question for
Well,
you two nerds.
They actually were doing stuff like that within the movie because the only people that actually read the comic books were reading pre-1960s Superman,
Right.
where then, pre-1970s Superman, where he had just all types of weird powers that
Yeah.
he does not have now. So they was just like, oh yeah, sure, we can do whatever we want, and people just take it.
It was one of those things where they would just add. By the 70s, time the 70s comes, Superman just could do anything they wanted.
Part had to do with the new editor at DC Comics that
Right.
started introducing a super dog, a super horse. He was
yeah.
the one that even threw in Supergirl. And a lot of people don't realize that Superboy himself was not a real character within the Superman continuity. There was never a Superboy. It was actually a villain called the Time Trapper that actually invented Superboy from the Legion of Superheroes
Right.
storyline and then shoved it in there. Because Superman got his costume and his name, well, his name from Lois Lane
Right.
and his costume well into his 20s when he was already in Metropolis.
Yes.
And it was just really weird.
Yeah. But by now, there have been so many backstories to Superman that. Yeah.
Well,
And
I think
every
they like,
few years they put
finally
out a new-
solidified one continuous one, where is in, his father is alive, he didn't die when he was younger, and
Well, that's what they did with the John Byrne miniseries,
Yeah.
Man of Steel. But supposedly, I know people. I haven't read it. I haven't read comics in a while. But the 52, when they relaunched that, they sort of rewrote.
the new 52, I'm just gonna, anybody who enjoys the new 52, hey, that's awesome. Collect comic books, read them, love them, enjoy it the way I did when I grew up. But when the new 52 came out, it was
Okay, now explain. I don't understand.
Well,
what you're talking about.
DC
50
Comics
52 is
decided
redecided. That's a gold era or the silver era?
Well,
from when,
well,
in
52 is
the new
basically right
52
now.
is
Yeah.
right now.
Is
Yeah.
that
They-
from 1952 on, or what
No,
are you
no, no.
talking about?
Just, well, I'm going to explain the number 52 where it comes from. DC Comics decided to take every single title that they have within their company and discontinue all of them,
Yeah.
with the exception of only 52 different titles. And each title within that 52 got like a revamped version. For example, Superman and Lois Lane got married in the Superman, timeline, but in the
Right.
new 52, he's not with Lois Lane. He's more with Wonder Woman.
Right.
The Joker, for example, in the new 52, from what I understand, and again, I don't read these, but in New 52, the Joker actually has a face that's stapled onto
Yeah.
his face. And again, the New 52 is awesome. Read it. It just showed me that it's time for me to not read comic books anymore. I had my time. Now it's the younger versions have their time.
They basically reset hit a giant reset button, which is something they sort of did right after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they sort of just realigned the whole universe.
Correct.
But this
done
time
that.
they really just completely rebooted it, with the exception of the Batman series. All previous history was basically wiped out.
Correct.
Yeah.
The New 52 Batman is even weird as well, where
Yeah.
He's not as dark and gritty and soulless. And in this one, he's like crying in a couple of issues because he remembers his father. So I was like,
Yeah.
all right, that's cool.
So
It's a big change.
in bringing everything back to Superman 2, what is in relation to the first film? I mean, I had felt in the past, when I was younger, I thought this was my favorite Superman film, but I grew an affinity to the original. I definitely like the Lester cut of the film better than the Donner cut of the film,
Right.
but it's a little unfair because Lester got to finish the film, whereas Donner didn't have his script finished. He got fired because there was a disagreement. But I see that Superman 2 worked best as a hybrid between the two directors.
Yeah.
Where you took some of column A, some of column B. Even though more of what you see on the scene belongs to Donner. I mean, there's great scenes. I think that the Eiffel Tower sequence wasn't in the Donner version of the film.
No,
which
because I
like.
think it was originally supposed to. It was like Missy said, that original sort of cliffhanger. It was supposed to go a whole different direction with that.
But
The two early Superman movies actually were plagued with problems throughout. They ran into issues with scripts. They ran into issues with money. It went amazingly over budget. They spent they spent more money on the credits in the first Superman movie. Supposedly, this is the rumor I heard. Then they spent really on all of like Superman 4. Like Superman 4 is like the budget to that movie is equivalent to an independent
like a
film.
Caesar and Otto
There's
film, pretty
definitely
much.
some untruth there, but I can see why, because Superman 4. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it. Wow.
I like to watch 1 and 2 a lot, and Zod and that trio, Non and all that. They were great.
Yeah.
They were great, iconic villains, and I even like the human story of Superman when he gets weak and he sacrifices his strength, his powers to be with her, to be with Lois. I mean, I think that's the stuff of good drama. That's just a good story.
That's something that worked for the film, but it would have never happened within a comic book series.
You know
itself.
what? You know what? You're a real pain in the neck.
Well, I mean, I think
Just knocks her out.
he's absolutely right. What do you call it? It works in film versions of superhero movies, never in a comic or a continuing series type of thing where he would just give up his. I mean, and that's like, it's the same thing with, and I hate to reference this movie, but Dark Knight Rises. Batman just quit after Dark Knight and then spends 8 years on the bench. I was like, that's such a movie thing to do.
Yeah. You can just
Movies
tell
love
when
people
someone
quitting.
has a love for the original, content, because the thing is, we're not talking about a film that was built from scratch when someone's idea. You have the reference. The comic book is right there. The cartoons are right there.
Everybody
It's
seems,
really-
as you look at Man of Steel versus Superman and all these things, everybody will have a somewhat different vision of what that means to them. Man of Steel
Which is, of
feels
course,
radically,
fine.
tonally different than, say, the Donner Superman. You read a book, everyone's got a different interpretation of what said book means. Now, that being the case, I think it's about time.
But the difference with that is if you take one book, people are going to have different interpretations, but it's one book. Superman, you're taking thousands of comic books, thousands of different interpretations of it, and you're basically funneling all of that. So, I mean, who people expected Superman to be in 1978 is drastically different than they expected him to be in the early 2000s and now.
I would have to completely agree with that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, the character himself has gone through a lot of changes. And one of the wonderful things about comics, if you've ever been a comic book fan, is you can actually see the way your favorite characters change and evolve to match the
Grow
time
and-
periods. I mean,
absolutely.
that's the wonderful thing you get from a medium that continues nonstop as the world changes. I mean, even TV shows, if they run 25 years, with the exception of The Simpsons, is rare, but you get to see that in comic books like no other place. I mean, you can get the trade paperbacks from the 70s and see.
Scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate Superman 2?
Superman 2, in my personal opinion, would have to be rated higher than Superman 1, only in terms of they finally showed Superman's reaction to things Kryptonian, whereas part 1, they didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
But part 1 was still awesome. It was just wonderfully done, and it was cool, Metropolis and everything. But part 2 was, Zod, and then his Kryptonian history, and then what he would do to sacrifice, and then his mother was introduced, and it was just such a great. And the action as a child, forget about it. I mean, we look at it now, and it says a lot about a movie when you watch something at 8 years old, and then 10 years later at 18, it's still cool. Then 10 years later at 28, it's still cool. And then you have kids that weren't even born around that time spitting out lines from a movie. I mean, it says a lot about a movie.
Yeah. It's amazing how much advertising Superman destroyed in Superman 2.
Well, listen.
He's getting thrown into a lot of product placement. Okay, so you give it what? On a scale of 1
I
to
would
10?
definitely give it a 9 easily.
I give it a 9. So basically, I give Superman 1 a 10 out of 10. I give Superman 2 a 9 out of 10. I love them both. How about you, Peppercorn?
I have to give Superman 2 an 8 out of 10. It's a fantastic movie, and an 8 out of 10 is a strong vote for me. There are some scenes in it that are cringeworthy. Some of the stuff in Niagara Falls is a little, it's just like, even now, I mean, definitely as a kid.
What a nice man. You like when Superman's flying by.
You didn't like the freshly squeezed orange juice?
Yes.
But there's some scenes like that. And
as she's smoking a Virginia Slim?
We're running short on time, so we're going to quickly breeze through Superman 3 and Superman 4. We're just going to talk through the trailers. Why don't we throw those up right now, and we're going to give our very truncated review of both.
It's a shame
these
because
films.
the Superman 3 trailer is wonderfully misleading. And it's basically just like, and now your villain, Richard Pryor. It's sort of like an advertisement for the Batman TV show from the 60s. This week on Batman, Richard Pryor as the hacker.
I rewatched it today. Now, this does not use any existing comic book villains that I'm aware of. So
Well,
there's
it was
Lex
supposed
Luthor,
to be
Zod.
Brainiac. That was the plan. There was supposedly a plan to do Brainiac and then Bizarro in the fourth one. And the villains are sort of like that, but not really.
Wow.
It's just super
It's a failed
Yeah.
You feel
watered
like
down imitation of what Brainiac
forcing,
was.
they're
Yeah,
forcing the pieces. It's like, well, Richard Pryor is marketable, but he's not really a
And he was
computer
doing
hacker.
a lot of family films at this time.
And how could we fit him in as a hacker? I mean, Richard Pryor should not be a hacker. It is so against. I mean, because he doesn't play somebody who seems well educated. He doesn't seem somebody who seems particularly smart. It is a very stupid bit of casting, and you're forcing him into something that he doesn't fit nicely with. Robert Vaughn just seems like a discount Lex Luthor.
Yeah.
And the comedy is really bad in a lot of this film.
Oh, it's just
It's
tacky all the way through.
Even the opening credits are bizarre.
I would probably have to say, in all honesty, Superman 1 and Superman 2 brought in a huge amount of money. Superman 3 actually brought in a respectable amount of money, although it is just not a good movie, because there were certain things about Superman 3 that really got people interested in Superman the character. For example, when Superman was exposed to a altered version of Kryptonite, he became this bizarro version of Superman where he was just a jerk. And what was that, in part 3, right?
It was a great.
Richard Pryor is essentially trying to remake Kryptonite, and there's a mystery element, so he just replaces
But
it
what
with
is
tar.
what a stupid way of doing it. It's such an inorganic plot. The plot basically consists of they're just trying to fit the pieces together. It doesn't flow. You know what this is? When I watched Superman 3, I thought this is the Crystal Skull of the Superman series, where it's sort of like there's elements there that sort of work and they resemble what you like.
Well,
but
they
it
actually
doesn't.
ended up getting that from the Radio Superman, because in the Radio Superman is when Kryptonite was first introduced. And once that was an established, thing within the Superman storyline, in or around the same time where they started introducing like Super Dogs and Super Horse and Super Monkey, they started throwing in red kryptonite, white kryptonite,
And it all had-
jewel kryptonite, and they all had different things. A red kryptonite somehow turned him into some sort of Ant-Man hybrid thing, so that's actually where they got it from. But again, this is coming from people who didn't read the Superman storylines. They just read what was going on, and they were like, "Oh, well, we can do that." And then they just, grabbed the kryptonite and were like, "Oh, let's make him into a drunk."
Lester probably was not a big Superman fan. That's what I feel when watching this. And so what? In a nutshell, on a scale, I give this a 5 out of 10, and I'm being kind.
I have to give it a 3 out of 10.
3. Oh,
And the
God.
only reason I give it a 3 is for the my personal love of Richard Pryor, and then the junkyard fight.
The junkyard fight. That was
It doesn't hold up as well. over time.
confusing, but it was so entertaining.
Yeah,
We're
but
now on to
it's-
Superman
it's an
4.
analogy. It's-
We're,
yeah.
okay, yeah, that was a great sequence, and that's a standout, but it's not
But I would
from
have
that
to
flow.
agree, I would
Superman
give it a
4 is
5.
now playing in the background behind us, the Superman 4 trailer.
Best one yet.
Yeah, Quest for Peace. It's,
This is a brilliant plot.
Okay, a
Superman
lot of people
forcing his
actually
will on
didn't
the world.
realize that the one person, surprisingly enough, that had to do a lot with the storyline was Christopher Reeve himself.
Yeah.
He wrote a lot of this, and as you know what, as much as I love Christopher Reeve, he has a very dear place in my heart. I'm actually going to be at some point during May getting tattooed by Sarah Miller, Ink Master, Christopher Reeve portrait on my rib. That's how much I love him. He's awesome. But wow, his writing was just horrible for this movie.
Somebody tried to sue him. They said that they took his idea, so maybe it's not his. Maybe the Christopher Reeve just plagiarized somebody who was a very bad writer.
Which would honestly be even worse.
The rumor I had heard was that the only reason Christopher Reeve would come back is if the storyline, the Quest for Peace storyline about him basically destroying nuclear weapons and throwing them into
Right.
the sun was, that.
Which,
the fact that they
again-
agreed to it was just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Well,
I mean,
But it was
is-
like Canon Pay. It was a whole different company at that point.
yeah.
Well, again, it just shows how little Christopher Reeve really read the comic books, because within the comic book, they never had Superman solving the world's problems, because they thought of that as an insult to the people who in real life were solving the world's
What
problems.
about Dark Knight Returns and things like that? Doesn't that seem like somewhat akin to that?
It's just somewhat
It's a
like
different,
that.
but he's
Superman.
stopping a nuclear missile that's fired at a place. I mean,
Yeah, when
this is-
you
yeah.
have, for example, Superman flying around the world. See, Batman himself is in Gotham. That's it. He's not. Superman is hanging out with people at the UN. So when you have Superman flying around the entire world and saying, "Give me your nukes," and then throws them up in the sun.
We all know, politically speaking, how difficult that is.
I mean, let's be
I
honest.
read-
It's also, like I said, I mean,
You
it's
had
just-
Superman solving the entire nuclear, threat in
Right.
half a day, and that was insulting.
Well, that can't be
for-
done.
That was insulting
It really
for people
shouldn't
who
be
actually
done. I
were
mean, 'cause
really,
forcing his will on
trying to
sovereign
solve
nations.
those issues.
Because you know what happens? Superman throws all the nukes into the sun, and then there's gonna be one small country that's gonna be like, ha! Now we're the only nuclear power in this game.
in the
that's
comic
fine.
books, during World War II and any World War, they never had Superman, Batman. They never had the people in the comic books going over there and beating up Hitler, bringing him to court or anything like that. Because again, it was insulting
Superman
the soldiers.
beats the Nuremberg trials. Yeah, that's.
It was disrespectful to the soldiers that really were overseas and fighting the good fight and protecting the U.S. and doing that. So they only had Superman and Batman doing small things, like Superman would deliver weapons. Superman would urge people to grow victory gardens. Stuff like that.
Scale of 1 to 10.
Oh,
Before we go to commercial.
1.
1.
I honestly could not give it a 1 because it's Superman.
I'm
It's
just happy to
Christopher
see
Reeve.
the game working.
I would probably give it a 3.
Well, it's Superman 4, so let's give it a 4. And John Cryer's in there. John Cryer, I think of what a perfect fit he is for Superman.
And it was the return of Gene Hackman. I
It was
missed him
the
in
return
part
of Gene
3.
Hackman.
They put him in part 4. I have to give him a 3.
It was, what a misfire that movie
And
is.
now it is time for our commercial break. And when we come back, some more Superman goodness and possibly some surprises. Take it away.
Stop putting it off and start painting it up today at Ben's Paint Station, featuring Benjamin Moore paints, Sickens, wood finishes, paints, and professional paint supplies, ideal for contractors and homeowners, stain paints and epoxies, family owned and operating, in business for over 55 years, professional and experienced help, located at 2 locations, 55B Route 25, Coram, Long Island, New York, and 1495 Plaza, Montauk Highway, Mastic, New York.
Moriches Bay Diner and Restaurant. Steaks, chops, wraps. breakfast skillets. The Mauritius Bay, 62 Montauk Highway in Mauritius, New York. 878-6827. The Mauritius Bay Diner and Restaurant in New York.
InRevio.com.
Stay in tune guitar strings. Guitar strings, bass strings, polish and accessories. Stay in tune guitar strings. Akron, Ohio. www.sitstrings.com.
InRevio. Transmitter? We don't need no stinking transmitter. Welcome to InRevio.com.
Hey, this is Paul Discofani, the disco portion of the Glory Days with Bruce and Disco show on Sundays, 10 a.m. to noon. It's a sports show with a twist. We have entertainment, music, and whatever you want to talk about. Only on InRevio.com, broadcasting to the world.
Good Times Magazine, New York's best entertainment paper for 43 years. Check out their calendar for all the latest music info, including New York City, Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk. Studio News brings you the biggest news about the hottest artists and sounds. Technobeat is your guide to electronica, techno, house, and dubstep. Packtrack keeps you up to date on the biggest events at the area's performing arts centers and theaters. Good Times Magazine gives you all this and more. It's bi-weekly and it's free. Pick up your copy today or visit goodtimesmag.com.
Are we back? Hey, that's okay. So according to the website InRevio.com, we're broadcasting to 6.8 billion people. So I guess maybe only 6.7 billion are watching right now. But you guys, got to get more active in that chat room, or else,
Each one of those.
I know we're
viewers sends us a
really
nickel.
compelling. We're really compelling right now, but you can interact with us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have some important news to tell you. My newest feature film, Caesar and Otto's Deadly Xmas, in which I play the world's worst actor, Caesar Denovio, will be coming to DVD next Tuesday. But ahead of its release, 112 Video, the last remaining video store on Long Island, will be hosting an advanced DVD premiere party this Saturday. That's in Patchogue, where I will be in attendance and I will be signing autographs. How presumptuous is that you want my autograph? But figuring that you do, I'll be there signing these guys. And for every rental film that you rent at 112 Video, you will be put into a raffle. Not you personally. A stub will be put into a raffle, and the winner of which will get a copy of Deadly Xmas as well. So I'll be there. We'll be screening the film. We'll be screening the Caesar and Otto series. It will be an amazing time, and you have to come down. I don't care if you live in California. I don't care where you live. I want to see you down there. Okay, now that being said, Peppercorn Montgomery, that's his real name, by the way. It's totally not him. Now, Peppercorn Montgomery has brought with us a great show and tell item. And I want him to have the opportunity to show us what that is.
All right, real quick, and I'm sure we'll throw it up on the screen also. I have a big pile of Superman stuff too. I didn't bring it all with me, but so I just brought one item. I didn't want to bring the whole case of comic books. I actually read most of those. Those are great. He brought a great selection. But I brought the Superman, the Death of Superman series, where he fights Doomsday to what we thought was his death in Metropolis. It was, as far as an action-spanning comic, it's really exciting. I mean, it starts off with Doomsday fighting the Justice League, and then Superman flies in and to save the day, and it ends up with just a good old-fashioned slobber knocker of a fight in the middle of Metropolis. It's a good read. It moves, it's fast, and it's, I'm sure it's something that at the time everyone was talking about. I think now with the reboot of Superman and everything else like that, it's, I don't know, it's lost a little bit of its luster maybe. But it's, but go out and pick it up. It's the trade paperback, The Death of Superman, and stuff, and then everything that comes after it is worth checking out too. So that's
it was actually fantastic. Whereas during that time, a lot of people don't realize it now, but when The Death of Superman hit the stores, the people in real life, like real life on the news, were acting as if a real person really died.
Yeah, but
it was
those
on the news. I mean, people were. I mean,
that's
and
because
I
those
remember,
people are crazy. You weren't one of those people. You
Well,
weren't like.
Well, at the time when it came out, at the time when it came out, I was 11 years old. And during that time, I just started reading comic books with my grandfather, who, God bless his soul, was the one that really got me into comic books. And we would read it together because at that time, I just started speaking English because I was actually born in Far Rockaway, but I moved to Puerto Rico and came back to the States when I was 6. So I only knew how to speak Spanish. I learned how to read English and speak English through comic books, and then I would read these comic books to my grandfather. So that was just our thing together. When The Death of Superman came out, I was sick, and my grandfather waited outside of a store from 5:30 a.m. to about 8 a.m. just to get his hands on this comic book and brought it to me. And I remember being 11 years old, like, are you serious? They're kidding off this guy? And I just started liking him, and I started reading it, and then it got worse because the news came on and said, The Death of Superman is hitting stores, and it was a black cover with a red Superman symbol with blood dripping on it. It was a really sad moment for me being a kid.
But it was all a dream, so he was fine.
It was actually really a cool read afterwards because they had immediately afterward what was called Funeral for a Friend.
Yeah, they did the whole
Funeral for a Friend, I don't know if you can get a close-up of that, was the cover was a photograph of Jimmy Olsen taking a picture of Superman on the floor, broken in concrete, the costume ripped up, just dead. And for like 6 or 7 months, this was like a 15-issue miniseries where it just didn't have Superman in it. It was his friends, his family, other superheroes reacting to Superman being gone. And
the
it was
world
actually,
without a Superman.
It was a very touching story.
It is now time we have to move on to the next installment in the Superman series, which is Superman Returns. We will be talking through this trailer. This is a film that's elicited a lot of different emotional reactions from people. So if we could play that up in the background, I want to start by saying that I like Bryan Singer as a director. I think that he's one of those filmmakers that doesn't feel he has to shake the camera like crazy to tell an action, to tell a story. And I think he's got an elegance to his filmmaking that I think that even a Zack Snyder, who's more ambitious, but he has an elegance to his filmmaking that I feel that Zack Snyder didn't. I feel that Singer, when I first saw this film, I was very excited. I enjoyed it very much. When I rewatched it, it lost something. I felt that he was a little handcuffed by the casting of Superman by trying to find somebody that was so accurate to Christopher Reeve that maybe he didn't get the best possible actor for the role. As much as I think Brandon Routh is a likable actor, probably not the best possible choice for the character. Are we on screen? Okay. There we are.
I mean,
Okay, so
I would agree and disagree with that.
But let me just finish those thoughts right there. I like the film. I did. A lot of people are antagonistic to it because they feel like it didn't update the series, that it needed to come into the new generation. Some of the people were complaining that Superman was now a spy and a voyeur and a peeping Tom, listening to people. I didn't take it that way. I mean, come on. If we all had that hearing, when somebody's talking about us, you can get paranoid. You're going to listen in. He has the ability where you almost can't tune out. I thought there was humanity to it. And I like the film. Act 3 kind of starts to drag, and I lose interest. It's sort of more of a melancholy Superman. But so was the new one. And then, other people who had issues with Superman Returns for being so dark were like, oh, I didn't like Superman Returns, but I like the new one. Well, guess what? They're both dark movies. So make up your mind. I enjoyed both these films. I put them below Superman 1 and 2, but they're a hell of a lot higher than Superman 3 and 4. So that's my personal feeling on it. I think Superman Returns gets a bum rap. Even critically, it did pretty well. It was the audiences that got particularly...
Absolutely correct.
I'm going to say nitpicky on it. I liked Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor. I like Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor better, but I like Kevin Spacey's Lex Luthor.
Well, Superman Returns, a lot of people don't realize, was not a revamp, and it wasn't based on the comic book at all. It was actually supposed to be a continuation from Superman 2. So the actor himself had to portray Christopher Reeve in some sort of way because that's who he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be Christopher Reeve. The actual storyline is 5 years after Superman 2, and they kind of pretend that Superman 3 and 4 just didn't happen. So we had, because I had a lot of people who didn't understand, well, how is it that Lois Lane had a Superman's kid? Well, again, if you remember Superman 2, when he gave up his powers, he slept with Lois right afterwards. That's the actual point where he impregnated her. And that's why she has his kid now. So
it's more closely tied together than I thought, but he has the powers. Yeah. Kid has the powers.
The kid develops the powers.
When Clark Kent was powerless at that moment. He was just a weakling little man at that point.
He was, but the kid had Kryptonian DNA. The way Superman's powers work is that he is a solar battery. The longer he absorbs the sun, the stronger he becomes. The image that we have of Superman picking up a car when he was an infant actually didn't happen really in the modern Superman story that we know of. He was a very normal child, and it wasn't until he started absorbing these energy from the yellow sun is where his power started developing.
Who's calling us? Jerry. Well, we're going to finish this review, and then quickly, how do you feel about, and then we'll patch into Jerry R.
Well, real quick on Superman Returns. I didn't care for this movie right out of the gate. I loved... Yeah. To heck with it. I will not like things because people tell me to. I love the space plane saving that scene, that action sequence. I actually
getting
really
shot in the eye too,
Yeah. I really love that. But other than that, the problem with this movie is not the choices that Singer made, unless you count the casting. The casting with Lois and with Superman or Clark, there is no chemistry there. Kate Bosworth, or I haven't got that right, whatever, brings nothing to the Lois Lane character. Brandon Roth is not even allowed to speak for most of the movie. Kevin Spacey is just doing bad Gene Hackman, and he's just not the Lex Luthor I want to see. Kevin Spacey has done amazing work where he's a very intimidating guy in a lot of films. I didn't feel any threat or fear from Lex Luthor at all in this one. Yeah, 100%.
Well, could you really feel threatened by Gene Hackman with all his quirkiness with the wig falling off?
I think they were both great.
But at least
you're being too hard. Yeah. You're being too hard on Kevin Spacey. I think they were both great. Gene Hackman's a little better. Let's bring in Jerry Harder. Let's bring in Jerry Harder.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Jerry, you were starting to tell me something on Facebook that sounded like a freaking great story, and I have to hear it.
Yeah, this is pretty crazy. I guess I'll just touch a little bit to preface this whole nonsense. Superman Returns was basically kind of Bryan Singer's love letter to the Donner films. That's to me what it was. It was as if there was Superman 1 and 2, and they had directly led into Superman Returns.
Correct.
Which kind of even gave you that vibe. They had the John Williams score, and a guy who looked incredibly like Christopher Reeves. Well, this is where it gets kind of weird, though. I've done a lot of history as far as kind of the studio inner workings of the Batman projects and the Superman projects. And what it essentially said was that Warner Brothers, DC Comics, would own the character Superman. However, if a Superman movie was to be made, the Salkinds would either have a piece of it or some kind of involvement. So they owned the movie rights, whereas Warner Brothers owned the Superman character. After the debacle that was the filming of Superman 1 and 2, as you know, early on, they pulled Richard Donner out of the filming and, had put in the other guy. I forget the guy's name. You guys know his name?
Richard Lester.
Richard Lester, who directed The Three Musketeers and The Four Musketeers.
Back to back. Or actually pretty much at the same time, and that kind of made them think, hey, we can squeeze a lot of work out of this guy.
Well, that was the thing. But what ended up happening was Superman 1 and 2 made a ton of money. However, the studio felt they went over budget, and it was more of a headache than it was worth. And franchises weren't very commonplace at that time. You know, you had very few successful franchises, especially genre stuff, other than James Bond. They just didn't really exist at that point just yet. So what it boiled down to was, after the headache that was Superman 1 and 2, Warner Brothers they just did not want to do a Superman 3. And the impetus of the story is actually quite interesting, because the Salkinds are sitting there and they're kind of like, well, should we make another one? Now, Christopher Reeve's career was stalling. It really was. And there was a deal that was signed between the Salkinds and Christopher Reeve. I guess Reeve was naive at that time or didn't understand. His deal that was signed with the Salkinds was that he, in perpetuity, would play Superman, which means that until he got old enough or whatever, he would just play him. And Reeves really dug being Superman. He loved it. Before his accident, he used to do a lot of charitable events. There were a lot of things. You know, people talk about Johnny Depp these days as Captain Jack Sparrow. Christopher Reeve was going to children's hospitals long before he ever did it in the Superman outfit. People really didn't know this because it wasn't something that he wanted to bring attention to, but his career was stalling. So he was really pushing on Warner Brothers and the Salkinds, we've got to get a third movie out. Now, Richard Pryor, who was still kind of a hot button at the time, considering everything going on, he went on the Johnny Carson show, and he said, I'd love to be in a Superman movie. Largely by knowing that Pryor had a good prior box office record. That was a really cheap pun. He had a really good prior box office record, so they figured this would inject some new blood. Now, at this point, once Pryor hadn't been injected, just like the Love Boat used to have guest stars all the time, the formula was going to be, we're going to get a different wacky guest star or someone who's iconic in pop culture and just slap them in the other Superman movie. Now, if you listen to the commentary with Richard Lester, which I suggest fans out there really go back and listen to the Superman 3 commentary, the first thing he says is, this is just another episode. They were pretty much going to make these movies cookie cutter. They were going to try to churn one out every 2 to 3 years, but there really was no love. And the love and soul that was there, I guess, because of Richard Donner, who, really represents that, it has to be, because it seems that magic was kind of gone. It's still kind of there in Superman 2. But I just thought it was very interesting.
It was there in Superman 2 because he only directed 25% of Superman 2. Now, when it came to Superman 3, that's all Lester, and he's like, hey, let's really camp it up, which was a bizarre choice, but that's the choice that Lester wanted to take.
Yeah, that's...
Goes into that longer the conversation. Jerry and I were talking about when a director has a successful film and then he makes a sequel of it, he tends to bring all of the worst elements of the previous sequel. You can see it time and time again.
Dave has about the sequel elements is completely valid. I've gone, I've looked, I've done the research. Dave will explain this all in a moment. I'm just going to impart you with one last piece. By the time Superman 4 rolled around, Warner Brothers really didn't give a crap other than the foreign distribution rights. So they had given it to Cannon, which was Golden Globus, who made such films as Bloodsport and Invasion USA. They
Over the
they
top,
also made
man.
Masters of the Universe. And I'm not saying these are bad films, those films, but they were probably not the right guys to hand a superhero franchise. If you've ever seen the Captain America movie that was made with Matt Salinger, then you know that they should be just banned from ever doing superhero films. The reason 4 came about was because of Christopher Reeve. He had hit a roadblock. He was Superman. So he said, damn it, if I'm going to be Superman, I'm going to ride this out. I'm going to ride it out as Superman, go off into the sunset. So it really was part of Canon seeing it as, hey, we can turn this into a profitable worldwide franchise. And not only that, that was the other thing. The Nuclear Man, what was his name? Solar Man?
I
Nuclear
actually
Man,
don't
I think
even...
they called him.
Captain Power.
Nuclear Man. They had the option to take other characters like Brainiac, but the thing was is that they would have to pay a royalty to to Warner Brothers, aka DC Comics. So that's why they invented their own, because they were too cheap to pay
I
for
got to
a
mention
Brainiac.
something on that note. My friend was writing Spider-Man for Canon, the same when they owned the rights before Sony took over. He was writing. He got hired to do a draft, and he wasn't allowed to use Doc Ock, Green Goblin, so he had to invent a sort of hybrid new character. So that's what Canon did in that time period, was to sort of create alternate villains, not the ones you're familiar with, for budgetary purposes, which kind of kills the magic.
I'm going to leave you with this really quickly. Christopher Reeve loved playing this role. It really is his legacy. It was something that he enjoyed doing. So even if we can look back at the silliness and ridiculousness that is Superman 3 and 4, we know that it came from a genuine place of a man who loved doing what he did best, and that was being Superman, because it's a role that even now in death he'll always be linked to as the guy as Superman. On another note, I really dug Man of Steel. It's very split. I'm going to leave that to you guys. It's been a pleasure as always. I hope you all have a great show, and I'm going to go off to keep reading these funny books.
All right, Jerry. Thank you.
Great hearing from you again,
care,
Jerry.
guys.
Good
Have a
talking to
good
you,
night.
Jerry.
All right, let us roll the Man of Steel trailer, and then we're going to talk right over it and give us our thoughts on it. Control room, are you ready on that trailer? So right off the bat, when I first saw Man of Steel, ironically with Jerry Har, it was in 3D. It was a late night, and that experience was perfect for the film. You know, and I got so into it. I admired the fact that even though that it becomes a frenetic film in the last half, that it took its time to build his characters and set his tone, set a mood. I thought that the depiction of Superman's home planet of Alderaan. No, what is his home planet? Krypton.
Krypton.
Kidding about Alderaan. Superman's home planet was. I liked that vision better. I liked. I found it a very effective movie, and when I left, I said, you know what? I like Superman Returns. I like this one even better. I took my friend to see this in 2D, and it was the Superman Returns all over again, because I watched him like, yeah, I like this, but I don't like it like I did when I first saw it. These films, both of these films for me, had lost a lot of quality. They dropped from a 9 to a 7 between, on a scale of 1 to 10, between the times that I saw them, first and second. I still recommend them, but I'd be hard-pressed to tell you which one between the two I'd like. I like the casting of this actor because they didn't feel handcuffed to get a guy that was very much like Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, the casting was much better in Man of Steel.
Yeah. But, okay, so you're eager to say
You
something.
almost have to look at these movies, at least as myself, as a huge Superman and comic book fanatic, whereas in DC Comics had a series of comics called Elseworlds, where they actually had issues with known superheroes, and they would put them in these different alternate realities of things that couldn't have happened, maybe would have happened, stuff like that. So you almost have to take these two films as almost Elseworld comics, whereas in Superman Returns, I took it as in, this is what would have happened if there was a continuation to Christopher Reeve's Superman 2, and I accepted it for what it was. And it worked for what it was. I mean, I can't say that it was a cool movie if I was a comic book fan, but it worked for what it was. It was entertaining for what it was. I got a kick out of it. Moving on, I probably would have given that movie a 6. Just because it kind of entertained me. It's just that I would have liked him fight a villain other than Lex Luthor and not pick up a rock. I would have liked to enjoy him with the technology that we have right now to fight Brainiac. Fight somebody cool. And this new Man of Steel was Zack Snyder, who's a huge comic book fan. And this Man of Steel was the Superman movie that I feel that Superman fans really needed to see. This is the one that we've been waiting for.
It's equally as diverse. You know what? I might even say that this one might even have more mixed reactions than Superman Returns. I think
it does. And I know because I rewatched the movie yesterday because I felt I had to. I saw it also in 3D in the movie theaters and stuff like this. I didn't love it. I felt the tone was just very dreary and dark, unnecessarily so. It's just really it was just a moody picture. And I know, the whole idea is they want to go through the emotional growth of the character of Superman. I'm all for that 100%. I just didn't buy the approach. I didn't like, Krypton was just, it was like black and white planet. And there was just choices all over the place that I just didn't care for.
But Krypton compared to the original film, which one do you think had the?
I think because of the special effects, this one was a little better. But still, personally, I kind of like the crystals better than the idea that everything was sort of that old pin thing you used to have on your desk, where you put your face through and stuck your tongue out. It's like everything looked like that, and it was
a lot of bizarre things. There was a lot of bizarre things.
Well, in Krypton itself, if you actually saw when the baby was born, and you actually saw the animals, and you saw the horizon, and you saw that the Man of Steel Krypton matched more to what Krypton was in the comic book than any other version before.
It makes it more of a real place.
Yeah.
But then, there's just choices, like little things that just drove me nuts when I saw it the first time, and then even more so when I saw it the second time. Like Jor-El's running away, first of all, Zod's coup, 20 minutes long. It's like the shortest coup in the history of coups. Yeah. And then, but he jumps on the back of a flying animal from Avatar, and I'm just like, everyone else has a ship. You don't have a ship? You can't.
Again, in Krypton, they actually had these strange creatures. You have to, like, for example, Doomsday himself.
And I've seen it in the comic books, and I've read comic books that take place in that. But why isn't everyone on it? Why is this just like this one guy, and the Codex he has to dive on? It's just it's chosen set pieces. I've never been a big Zack Snyder fan. For his movies, and
see, I would have to disagree. As a comic book fan, Zack Schneider has nailed it every time.
I don't like a book. It's highly. I liked
300. 300's the only one I really liked. But
comics are highly interpretive because you can look at the '78 Donner Superman. That is an extremely different vision than this new one. But yet they're from the same material. It's just such a different take on it.
Correct.
But I mean, it shows you that there is no one
comic book thing.
specific.
But anytime you do a movie, and you do a movie that's been done before, a remake, a reboot, whatever it is, you're always going to put your own spin on it. And I don't have a problem with that.
But at the end of the day, the real people that are really going to appreciate these comic book movies are comic book fans.
Right.
And when you have someone like Zack Schneider who, say, for example, did Watchmen, if you've ever read the Alan Moore Watchmen, which, I'm sorry, but if anybody has ever not read that, you are missing out. Alan Moore Watchmen, the comic book was fantastic.
Yeah.
He did that movie perfectly. He did that movie absolutely perfectly. And
see, I disagree. I love the comic book, but the movie movies are different than comic books, and I love the idea that he was true to the comic book, but at the same time, the movie just wasn't successful for me. The points never hit home. It felt moody. It felt dragged out, and the Man of Steel movie felt a lot of it the same. It was just like, let's throw out this set piece. The final battles are just big and messy. Lots of people die. Superman is not there saving people. He's just fighting, and fighting for the Earth. But the difference is in the Donner one and in the Superman 1 and 2, he's saving people. He's getting in the way of things.
One and
when
two
he does save people, it's not because he's tackling the other guy, it's because of that.
1 and 2 definitely have a lot more rewatchability to me, but these two have a lot more rewatchability than 3 and 4, let's be honest.
Oh, yeah.
But I would say that what this style by Zack Snyder feels like to me is a hybrid of Christopher Nolan and Michael Bay. And I don't mean that as a good or bad thing. That's just his individual style as maybe a result of Nolan being part of it.
It is his style.
Do we have a caller? Do we have? Okay, we're going to quickly go to Joe, our co-host. We could throw his picture, we could throw his mug, and let's hear him on the over the phone here. Joe, General Zod never called in, so give us your best Michael Shannon impression for 10 seconds.
Good job, Joe.
Yeah, that was Michael
I
Shannon.
don't have a General Zod impression.
Okay.
Just shout.
Okay, good to hear you. Good to hear from you, Zod. So anyway, what is your? You only got a couple minutes, pal. Give us like a quick rundown of the video games that you played as Superman, because I know how much you love them.
Video games, it's ridiculous because, and you said it before, Dave. You see me as I am more of a Batman fan, but I don't hate Superman. And you think a man like Superman, he's got
as omnipotent as he is, he's got super strength, he can fly, he's got, laser beamed eyes and all that stuff, and he's got cold breath and everything, and it would make great for a video game. And yet, a year in and year out, they never cease to amaze me of how they just can never do it. They haven't taken the time to take it and figure it out. And they did it with Batman 3 times. I can name you every Superman video game from Atari till now, and the garbage that it was.
Do it. You got 90 seconds.
The last one that came out was the Superman Returns game. The only thing fun about that was flying.
So you don't like the Superman Returns game? What was your thought on it?
Because it was ridiculous. It was like flying, but then the game, the beauty of when you played Arkham Asylum, I actually felt like I was playing as Batman. I felt like I was playing as Batman. I felt like I was Batman. That's what you have to do for these superhero games. You have to feel like you are the superhero. So take a hint, take the time, put some money into it. A Superman video game, as omnipotent as it is, they could figure something out, and it would be amazing to do that. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a game where you get to fight Brainiac. I know we mentioned Brainiac. You guys mentioned Brainiac earlier in the show. I totally want to see that. But you're never going to get it because, people just want to cash in and everything. There have been over 30 Superman games made in the past 20 years alone.
And none of them, to your understanding? Okay, what about Lego Batman 2?
Dave, don't. There's no way pleading this case. They're all garbage. I mean, if anybody who's ever played the Superman Nintendo 64 game, there's any evidence.
Shadow of Acropolis?
Superman for Nintendo 64. Probably one of the worst video games ever made.
Okay, no, I'm thinking of the GameCube one. GameCube had one that seemed Shadow of Acropolis. That to me.
That wasn't that good either.
Okay, I never got through it, so you must have a point there. But have you played Lego Batman 2?
Oh, Lego Batman 2 is great. Lego, I don't count that one. Everything Lego touches turns to gold.
So you're saying that as far as Superman from the first person point of view,
and the Indiana Jones game, they're all amazing. They're all the same game though.
Pretty much. Yeah. Well, you've never played a
so I guess the only people that come
Superman
close to the Lego people.
You've never
Isn't that
played
saying something about society lately?
Yeah. Okay, Joe. I think we've hit the end of our run, my friend. And are you going to be back here next week, or are you still tied away by this awful play you're doing?
I should be back next week.
Okay, I have no idea how your play is. So it could be awful, it could be the best play I've ever seen in my life. But
all right. Well, I was watching the show on the train. Good show tonight.
Thanks, pal. So hopefully we're going to see you next week because you're the one that says, hey, we got to review Thor. So if you want to review Thor, you better come on.
And I'd like to say before I go, your friend is very knowledgeable about Superman, and from a Batman fan to a Superman fan, well said, sir.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm actually a huge Batman fan, too.
Well, he's got tattoos of both these guys. Yeah. So, Joe, great hearing from you, and let us know if you're going to be back next week, or, hey, maybe we'll hit Robert back up again. So, anyway, it's great hearing from you, and we'll connect soon. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've hit the end of our tonight's program. Is there any closing thoughts on Superman? Man of Steel, Superman. Which do you prefer between Man of Steel and Superman Returns?
I do prefer Man of Steel, and I do think there is a potential for the sequels to be really good. I think the casting was fantastic, and really good. I don't know. We'll see what Zack Snyder does next.
Okay,
and I'm sure I'll.
And quick thoughts on Superman versus Batman.
Superman versus Batman, they're going to have to be very, very careful on how they do a movie like this. And when I say this, I'm sorry, but like I said, I'm a Batman fan, but this is probably going to cheese a lot of Batman fans off. We saw what Christopher Nolan's Batman can do on the silver screen. He fought Bane, got his ass kicked, whatever. But when you saw what Superman can do on the silver screen in Man of Steel, getting punched into space, back and forth, getting hit by a train, going Mach 50, flying around, it's going to be hard to put a fight of Superman versus Batman like they did, for example, in Frank Miller's Dark Knight, which a lot of people don't realize that they took away almost all of Superman's powers in order to make that fight even believable. They took away his heat vision, they took away his super speed, they took away his his super breath. They took away everything.
Well, it's Superman in his bat plane versus it's Batman in his plane versus Superman. Maybe that's the only way they're going to make it equal. Or Batman in his tank.
Yeah,
and then it's still not even equal.
I mean, before the fight even started, Superman was hit by a nuclear missile. He was hit by 5 other missiles. He was hit by a tank. He was hit by a sonic everything.
What do you think? They could do that. That they could level the playing field. Maybe.
Yeah.
But the difference is that that is a fight that takes place after they've known each other for so long.
Yeah, but then at the same time too, Batman and Superman both share the same moral obstacle.
Right.
They both don't kill. And if Batman finds out that kryptonite kills Superman, then you are putting Batman in a world where he's going to kill. You have to put Superman in a world where he's going to kill. Yeah. And, you know, let's be honest, that fight is going on last a couple of seconds, if that.
It's true. I mean, he's Superman. He just
and we've hit the 90-minute points at this point in this episode of Nerdgasm. What is it, the show about Norbit? Okay, it's Nerdgasm. With me tonight, for the first time, was Robert Tattoo. From Tatooine. And what is your tattoo shop that you run? Where is that?
I actually tattoo at Murder Inc. 3 in North Babylon, right here. It's a great tattoo shop. We play movies and music for you. I spend a lot of the time tattooing, talking about comic books and whatnot. Actually, you know what? Since you mentioned it, I got a pen. You want to autograph this for me? Because I'm right here. You know, I'm not for much trouble.
So, and that's us signing out. Until next time. When we review films and we don't know what it is yet, but it'll be great.
It'll be Thor. We know that one.
Maybe.
Thor is awesome.